Usually people wait longer into their Pokemon-based channels to do something like this, but I've always wanted to, and I've thought about it for a long time, so I'm doing it now anyway. Every Pokemon fan has dreamed of their perfect region, something that's filled with the things that inspire them and the things they know best. And I'm not immune to propaganda. I've done the same multiple times, pretty much throughout my whole life. But what would mine look like, especially now? And Game Freak, take note. I'm okay if you copy this idea, but I do expect $1 million. Frankly, I just want to see this get made. I don't know how to make games, and I don't have time to learn. Who knows, if you guys really like this video, I already know way more about this region than I'll have time to share, so this could be like a mini-series, and if it gets finished, maybe I'll commission some programmers, I don't know. But when thinking about a Pokemon game, I think the best place to start is the region, and I don't think I'm alone in that. If you start with your region and your map and your ideas, then the Pokemon you make for that region can fit in so much better with said region, obviously. Think of Galar. We would have never gotten a T Pokemon if they didn't start off basing the region on the UK. So to start off this series, I think it makes the most sense to just focus on the region itself, where it's based off of, the towns, the cities, the gym leaders, and things like that. Then we can move on to the lore, the story, and Pokemon later on. But I really hope we get to that, because I have this whole legendary system based off of Wiccan gods, which really doesn't have anything to do with my region, it just has to do with me. Anyway, region. I mentioned this in my Gen 10 prediction, but I love densely wooded areas. I'm a very nature-based person, and I feel like Pokemon Company hasn't really had a region like that yet. Don't get me wrong, all of the Pokemon regions are filled with forests, and there's at least one forest area in every game. But I mean like densely wooded areas the whole time, or at least the majority of the area. None of this open field nonsense. You remember that one area in the Sword and Shield DLC that looks like this? A whole bunch of that. Obviously in a fun way, like you do need different environments, and there would be different environments, but I really want to lean into that, and have the basic layout instead of plain field, forest. And there are better places in the world for this kind of region, but I live in Pennsylvania, and I know Pennsylvania best. So if I wanted to make a region with dense culture based on things I know, Pennsylvania is where it's gotta go. That's where I live. And not for nothing, but Pennsylvania is often ranked as one of the best states to view fall in. We're ranked highly for prettiest autumn weather in the US, and it comes down to how many different kinds of trees we have, so they all wilt at different times, leading to landscapes that look like this. Like, I live in the suburbs, but I often forget that I'm only a 30-minute drive from landscapes that are just this beautiful. Also, the game is going to take place in autumn. Fall is my favorite season, so suck it. But when thinking of how culture would influence the map, I got to planning out the region itself. And forgive me, I'm not an artist, so I just went into my favorite D&D mapmaker program, Incarnate. Not sponsored, I just use them a lot. And I used the art assets in there to make a map. So this looks more like a D&D map than a Pokemon map, and you'll have to forgive that, but it's the best I can do. Maybe if this series actually takes off, I can look into commissioning an actual artist to make a real map, and not just this usable one. Here we go. Welcome to the Farbor region. And yes, it is a combination of Farum and Arbor, or iron and tree in Latin. I don't use a lot of Latin in the naming of these areas, but all of the areas are some kind of inspired name, either a color and a synonym for a word, or a word in a different language, or some kind of pun. So let me know if you catch some of them in the comments below. But let me introduce you to these cities and their respective gym leader types. I don't have gym leaders themselves figured out yet, but that's probably more suited for the story segment of this series. However, their types are already figured out based on region. Furthermore, we'll just go left to right, down to bottom, because I can't really name them in order of gym badge, because in my perfect Pokemon game, you can do the gyms in any order. Unlike Scarlet and Violet, the difficulty is trained to your gym badge level, so you truly can do them in any order. Not like Scarlet or Violet, where, look, I love that you have the option, but there is very clearly a correct order to do the gym leaders in, always at the same difficulty. I want it to be more true to the anime, where you walk up, say, I have 3 gym badges, and the gym leader's like, oh, okay, let me put my ace away and pull out these 3 level 20s. So we'll start on the top left of the region, on the city inspired by the Erie region of Pennsylvania, Pintree City. We needed a snowy-based region, and northeast Pennsylvania is probably the coldest place we get. Plus, I think the idea of an ice-based region being conjoined to a massive lake is really fun. And of course, the gym leader here would be an ice-type gym leader. To its right, we have Mount Lurid. If you notice this large mountain range down the center, it's kind of just a mixture of the Appalachian Mountains and the Susquehanna River. And it's at least inspired by that. And the pinnacle of it is Mount Lurid. Inside is where the Pokemon League is held, your Elite Four and Champion challenges. But the path to get here is fraught and dangerous, of course it always is. We love a victory road around here. Moving on, we have our Wilkes-Barre-inspired area, Maloon City. And don't get too proud, Wilkes-Barreans. A good bit of my family comes from this region, and they lovingly refer to that town as the armpit of Pennsylvania. I wanted to represent that in Maloon City, so it's a poison gym type. Love you guys. Anyway, speaking of annoying and pissing off different areas of the US, we move on to Town. This is a little bit of a recreation. Pennsylvania does not have a coastline, we're landlocked. Instead of a coastline, we have a New Jersey. So in my perfect Pokemon region, New Jersey finally doesn't exist. Instead, we have a coastline, and Town is right on there, because like you need a beach. Moving to the bottom left, we now move to our Pittsburgh-inspired city, BlazeRod City. This part is pretty on the nose, and it wasn't meant to be a Minecraft reference, it just happened that way. Minecraft had a word that was already based on this pun, and I like this pun. But I have to have a city based on Pittsburgh. I'm pretty sure Pittsburgh produces the most steel in the US, if not the world. So a really industrial-based town with molten magma flowing down the side seems super fun. And I was really torn on making this gym steel or fire, to the point where I almost made every gym in this region have two types, just so this gym could be steel-fire type. But then I really couldn't think of good type combinations for the rest of them, so I backpedaled. Instead, this is a steel-type gym with a lot of fire Pokemon mixed in, and the gym leader's ace will be a steel-fire type, but it's still primarily a steel gym. Moving on to our Appalachia-inspired town, we have Town. I've got a lot of college friends actually who came from this mountainous middle region of Pennsylvania, and they've told me a lot of stories about it, and I visited a couple of times myself. I love the Pennsylvania mountains and how they're covered in trees, and I just knew that that kind of region needed to be represented in this game. Thinking rock type or grass type is pretty obvious for the gym here, and I'm envisioning these like wooded cave mountain areas outside the town that you can explore. Because like yes, there'll be exploratory areas, but this is still a route-based game. Push comes to shove and I ever get to make a Pokemon game, it'll be a 2D game. I don't know how to make a 3D game, and an open world 2D game sounds bad. Moving across the range, we have Empius City, based off of Harrisburg's region, and Harrisburg in general. This is kind of your centralized city, where it's not the biggest, but it's really just the official business that happens here. For example, although the Pokemon League is in Mount Lurid, the Pokemon League HQ is in Empius City, because, like all bureaucracy, it's unnecessarily complicated and very inconvenient. Moving down, we have our Lancaster and farmland-based region and city in Town. Pennsylvania has a massive amount of farmland, like just an absurd amount, and a lot of that comes down to the surprising amount of Amish folk who live throughout the middle of Pennsylvania. So adding a town in the region based on that, which is very farming-focused, felt natural. And this would be where the least amount of trees are in the region. As far as the gym type leader goes, it's either ground type or grass, right? Like it's farming. It just depends on how I'll land with Town. But honestly, I might just move grass up to the Elite Four and let these two settle with the other type. And finally, Freighter City, based on good old Philadelphia, the city I live like 15 minutes outside of, and I'm most familiar with. This is your big, bustling city of the region, near the coast, so it would have the most non-farmer regional citizens in it, and I don't think I have to tell you why the gym type here is fighting type. Gotta love Philly. To round us out, let's quickly go over the planned types of the Pokemon League of Mount Lurid. The actual characters themselves will remain unknown until later videos going over the plotline and lore of the region, but I went over all the gym types, so it felt only natural to include the Elite Four and Champion types here as well. Now, to be fair, not all of these characters or types are specifically inspired by Pennsylvania. Frankly, the Elite Four isn't too closely tied to the region itself most of the time, since it's just a couple of individual trainers. But I did have a couple more things I wanted to shout out about Pennsylvania, so I'll do it here. For one, if you notice, I haven't mentioned oil or coal at all so far. Pennsylvania is a massive exporter of oil and coal, but frankly, I hate fossil fuels, and I want us to move on to greener pastures and greener energy. 9 times out of 10, whenever someone brings up getting rid of fracking, everyone's like, oh, but the jobs. Fracking is literally poisoning the water for thousands of people and ruining Pennsylvania. You can get a new job, end fracking now. Anyway, as much as I hate the fossil fuels, I couldn't not mention it. So the first Elite Four member I envisioned would be this big oil baron monopoly type guy who just uses dark type Pokemon. For the next one, I wanted to shout out how historic Pennsylvania is. We're one of the oldest states in the country, which, compared to other countries, is not a very impressive feat. I mean, the US in general is a little shy of 300 years old, but for the US, this state is very old. So I did want like a historian Pokemon trainer who's ghost type specialist to give a nod to that. The only other reference I had in mind for the Elite Four was just having an Amish farmer that's grass type. Like I mentioned, we have a huge Amish population, and I thought it would be fun to represent that a bit. The next two are just some guy so far, but the last Elite Four member I want to be bug type. Not because it's particularly Pennsylvanian, just because there's only one other bug type Elite Four member in the entire history of Pokemon. That's Aaron from Gen 4. I just want there to be more. And the champion itself doesn't necessarily need to have a type, but I want them to primarily use Dragon and Fairy type because that seems like a really cool typing for the final challenger. And that's everything. Like I mentioned, this is just the region and planned types of the gyms and Elite Four members, but I would love to continue this series. It's mainly because it's a region that I've been having bounce around my head for years now, and it's just so fulfilling to put it down on paper and fun to do. If you guys seem to care about this, frankly even not because I had a lot of fun, I'll probably continue the series. Probably next with the starters, legendaries, and general lore, and then maybe with the plotline of the game and additional fakemon. And if I get extremely lucky, one day I would love to work with someone to make a 2D Pokemon game version of this region, but who knows what the future holds. Anyway, if you want to watch my last video that was all about the Switch 2 leaks and the dimensions that I got from those images, you can watch that right here. Until next time, you've been watching Right Toost. Of all the YouTube channels, it's the second one. Stay toasty, Slices.